You know, sometimes the loudest scream is the one shouted without a single word. Sometimes a glance says more than pages of explanation, and sometimes saying nothing tells everyone everything. Silence is much louder than it seems. You'll be surprised when you learn the truth. What do we know? The human mind cannot cope with emptiness. It starts to circle around every unanswered question. That's why, the moment you go silent, a war begins in the other person's mind. In those moments when you don't utter a single word, hundreds of sentences echo inside them, because when the answer is silence, everyone is left alone with their inner voice. And most people are afraid of their own inner voice. Some people don't want to understand you, they just want to make you talk. They provoke you, push you, test your limits, because their power feeds on your reactions. But when you stay silent, that energy flow is cut. Control shifts instantly from them to you, because it's not the one who speaks, but the one who leads who wins. Think of it like a game of chess. Every move is a word, but there are games where you can checkmate your opponent without making a single move. That's silence, that's strategic waiting. It's spotting the other's weakest moment, because when you go silent, they lose their way in the darkness of their own mind. Silence is not just an absence, it's a choice. And that choice draws its power from self-confidence, because anyone can speak, anyone can shout, but only the strong can stay silent. Words often fail to express us, but silence? Sometimes it says everything. When used correctly, silence becomes a language. You are not understood just because you are quiet, but because you are quiet at the right moment. Throughout history, great leaders have used silence at critical moments. For example, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk changed the course of history with a short but silent command before the Great Offensive. Mahatma Gandhi led millions into resistance against British colonialism without uttering a word. Nelson Mandela remained silent for years in prison, but every year of his silence spoke louder than the regime. Even Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of the Civil War, united a nation with just a few words that followed long moments of silence. Those few seconds of pause before a decision, they steer the crowd. Psychologists call it the impact gap. The brain wants to complete what is missing. And when you don't speak, the other starts speaking for you. They begin to hear their own fears through your silence. And that is the moment you win the game. But remember, not every silence is a victory. Silence works only at the right place and the right time. To avoid being misunderstood, sometimes you must not stay silent. Silence should be a strategy, not an escape. A strength, not a weakness. That's why knowing when to be silent is more valuable than simply being silent. Let's say someone is acting aggressively toward you, not physically, but emotionally. They're trying to provoke you. Yelling or responding is actually giving them what they want, but walking away in silence, looking them in the eye and saying nothing. In that moment, it's not your voice, but their own emptiness that echoes in their mind. Because people want to fill their emotional pockets. They steal your attention, your energy, your feelings. And silence is when you leave that pocket empty. They're used to you saying something. When you stay silent, they panic. That's where the power of silence comes in. The other side loses their balance, because the mind can't tolerate uncertainty. And the less you reveal, the more curiosity you create. Some battles, even when won, leave you lost. That's why not every argument deserves your entry, not every injustice your reply. On the contrary, they pull you down to their level. And sometimes, the strongest reaction is no reaction at all, because when you react, you're playing their game. But when you stay silent, you break the game. Remember, a person is not defined by what they say, but by when they choose to stay silent. Everyone says something, everyone talks, but few know how to be silent at the right time, and that's why the one who masters silence leads the crowd. Now stop and think. Recall your last argument, maybe with your partner, a friend, someone at work. Wasn't it your silence that spoke louder than your words? Maybe the moment you didn't respond was the moment that made them think the most, because silence is a mirror, and everyone sees their own face in it. For some, silence is a symbol of pride, for others, compassion, but in both cases, there's one thing in common: strength. Because those who speak are strong, those who are silent are stronger, and the strongest know when to speak and when to stay silent. That's why silence is a form of dominance that seeps into the subconscious. It influences without being noticed. The other person feels something is wrong but can't quite tell what. A discomfort settles in. Because you didn't give what was expected. Your silence creates questions in their mind. Why didn't they say anything? What are they thinking? What will they do? And those questions begin to eat away at them. In psychology, this is explained as the stress caused by unpredictability. The human mind feels disturbed by what it cannot control. And the more you stay silent, the less control they have over you. That's why one of the greatest tools of manipulation is silence, but not to destroy the other, to protect yourself. A Turkish proverb says, "Speech is silver, silence is golden." Not everyone deserves every word you say. You don't need to lower yourself to a level everyone can understand. Sometimes silence shows that you haven't lowered yourself, because every word is a reduction. The more you stay silent, the more you preserve your value, your level, even your identity. But then why do we want to speak sometimes? Because the human mind cannot bear uncertainty. Our inner anxiety reaches for words to regain control. Speaking is a way to relieve pressure. Shouting is the outburst of losing control. Sometimes it's the urge to prove we're right. Sometimes the desire simply to be heard. Most of the time, we speak to be known and understood. But we must remember, no word can replace the depth of inner silence. Now close your eyes. Recall your last argument. How did you feel when you responded? And how would you have felt if you had stayed silent? Maybe stronger, more balanced, more clear. Because in that moment, you didn't just face the other person, you turned inward. And silence is not only a strategy, it's a form of inner cleansing. And don't forget, great people don't need to explain themselves. Great people don't waste time on petty arguments. This video doesn't say you should never speak. Speak, but measured, timely, and enough. Maybe you're being accused. Tell the truth, but don't try to convince. Because the truth convinces on its own. Understanding silence, mastering it, will not only elevate you in relationships, but in life as a whole. Because this is not the language of words, but of character. And character doesn't always speak, but it's always felt. Send this video to someone who doesn't just want to understand, but wants to feel. To someone who constantly finds themselves in the middle of conflict. Help them remember this power. Have you ever won with your silence? When did you stay silent and everything changed? Write it in the comments. In the next video, we'll talk about when to stay silent, when to speak, and how to protect your boundaries, because sometimes the loudest decision comes from the quietest moment. Knowledge is power. Subscribe, follow, and hold the power in your hands. What do we know?